The subject of Volkswagen ball joints has come up in the DeLorean community. So I just want to say a few thoughts about VW Beetle ball joints in a DeLorean. This is a fairly common cross-reference part to put into a DeLorean. These are the ball joints that John Hervey used to sell. They're the ball joints that Brian Henniger used to use in his lower control arms. And I believe that they are the ball joints that Aaron is using in his aluminum control arms. And it is an eminently suitable cross-reference. It'll fit the hole in a DeLorean lower control arm, no problem. Press right in. Fits the knuckle. But there are a couple things that you need to be aware of if you're going to use one of these Volkswagen ball joints in your DeLorean. First is the lock nut on the stem. This is a source of much wailing and gnashing of teeth among some owners in the DeLorean community, because DeLoreans originally came with lock nuts on their ball joint stems. These are extremely common in Europe. The castle nut seems to be more of an American thing. This here is a castle nut off of a Ford pickup, and what it has is a hole through the stem. You run the castle nut down and then put the cotter pin in. Well, if you want to run a castle nut on your Volkswagen ball joint, there's no reason why you can't do the same thing DeLorean did in their recall. Remove the lock nut, run a castle nut down, run a drill bit through the castellations, and then stick a cotter pin in. This is a metric 12 fine thread, which I think is 1.25. So just find a suitable castle nut and you can do that. But I have never seen a Volkswagen ball joint from any manufacturer. Miley, Bilstein, Europart, they all have lock nuts. Some of them have deformed thread lock nuts rather than a nylock, but I have never seen a Volkswagen ball joint that had a castle nut. But if you want to put a castle nut on, there's nothing preventing you from doing that. Now, the second thing I want to point out are these orientation notches in the base of the ball joint. And the reason those orientation notches are there, this is a ball joint that I just folded the boot back on, and you can see the orientation notch matches the shape of the socket. Okay. It's not a circular socket. It's an oblong socket that is designed to move in this direction. It's not designed to move in this direction. And that's the purpose of those orientation slots, is so you know, without folding the boot back, how that slot is oriented. And your ball joint may come with instructions that warn you to install the ball joint with those notches pointed front to rear, not to install it with the notches side to side. And you'll also see Volkswagen owners who will tell you, if you install it like this, side to side, driver side to passenger side, that you're courting disaster. That you must install the ball joint with the notches pointed towards the front and the rear of the car. And the reason they do that is because Volkswagen lower control arms are not oriented like ours. They're rotated 90 degrees. This would be the front of the car, this would be the rear of the car. So the Volkswagen lower control arm is moving like this, 90 degrees perpendicular to ours. You can imagine that if you had the ball joint oriented with the notches side to side, that as the lower control arm moved up and down, the stem would be banging into the sides of the socket, which is not designed to do. It's designed to move like that. So the stem is moving this way as your lower control arm moves up and down. Well, our lower control arm sits like this. It doesn't sit like a Volkswagen. It's rotated 90 degrees. So if you install the ball joint with the notch pointed towards the front and rear of the car, then as our ball joint, our lower control arm goes up and down, the ball joint's going to be banging into the sides of that socket. So what you want to do on a DeLorean, don't follow the Volkswagen directions. Orient the base with the notches pointed side to side, so that way as your lower control arm moves up and down, the stem will be moving like this in the base. And the last thing I want to say is a little word about lubrication. This is a brand new out-of-the-box ball joint. All I did is I just rolled the boot back so you can see what it looks like on the inside. And this is all the lubrication that was inside this ball joint. In fact, it doesn't even seem to be in the socket. It's like they just slathered it on the stem. This ball joint, for all intents and purposes, is running dry, as is this one. They're both purchased at the same time. Now, most Volkswagen ball joints do not have a grease fitting in the base. So what I do is I drill a hole and I tap it and I put a grease fitting in. And that allows me to pump the entire joint full of grease until it starts to leak out around the boot. And then I know that my ball and socket are totally saturated in grease. I mean, this is not suitable lubrication, in my opinion. So if you're going to run these Volkswagen ball joints, my recommendations are, first and foremost, drill and tap them for a grease fitting so you can lubricate them properly. Secondly, install them with the notches going side to side from the driver's side of the car to the passenger side of the car, not front to rear, the way the Volkswagen people do it. And then if you want to replace the lock nut with a castle nut, that's certainly doable. You'll see some people say that you're not supposed to use the lock nut because it will work loose as the stem rotates. That is incorrect. If your stem is rotating in the knuckle, then you've got bigger problems than your lock nut. You'll probably end up snapping the stem off. This is a taper fit. This is supposed to be jammed up inside your knuckle, jammed tight, so tight that it's almost very, very difficult to remove when it comes time to replace the ball joint. You got to use a separator to force them apart. So this stem does not rotate, it just sits there. But if you want to put a castle nut on it, this is what a DeLorean was built like at the factory, which is common European practice. So all you have to do is remove the nylock and put a castle nut on, and you made just like a DeLorean ball joint. Now, The Europart ball joints. The two that I purchased, oh goodness, about 5 years ago, had no country of origin on the box anywhere. So I suspect that these are made in Asia. And I have seen on the internet where people have complained that Europart quality has gone down. It's not the same Europart that it was like back in the 90s and the early 2000s. And that probably explains this lackluster lubrication. When you buy a made in China ball joint, this is exactly what they look like on the inside. The Chinese just grab a little, doesn't even look like grease, looks like Vaseline, slather it in there and sell it to the Americans. But you can still get these ball joints made in Germany from Bilstein. Miley makes them. There's several German manufacturers that still make these in Germany, not in Asia. And like I said, there's millions and millions of Volkswagens still in service. So if you run the ball joint that they run, you should expect to have the same success that they're having. You don't see Volkswagen owners, even the dune buggy, the sandrail owners, about the only thing you're going to see them say is to backdate your suspension to a kingpin, because they do abuse the mess out of their suspensions, and they probably push the limits of even, a ball joint. They'll end up snapping their stems off. So prior to 1966, Volkswagens didn't have ball joints, they had kingpins. And so you will see the dune buggy owners advocating getting rid of the ball joint altogether. But that's just because the stress that they put their suspensions through is so far in excess of anything you would ever do. But if you're going to run a ball joint suspension, these are eminently suitable ball joints.